The wind howled like the cries of forgotten ghosts, tearing the sky of Niveria into a chaotic white veil. The blizzard roared, hurling razor-sharp shards of ice against the stone walls of Jackson Thorne's small house, making the windows shudder as if the planet itself were punishing anyone daring to exist. Outside, the cold was a blade against the skin, the temperature plunging far below survivable, the snow falling like daggers, erasing every trace of life. The ice-covered hills, carved into brutal shapes by the wind, stretched endlessly into the blinding white darkness, devoid of any figure. Only the storm's shrieking wail threatening to swallow everything. Inside, the house was a fragile sanctuary against the freezing death outside. The geothermal heater hummed, casting warmth through the weathered wooden walls, reinforced with scraps from a long-forgotten spacecraft. Firelight danced, throwing shadows across a scarred table, a worn armchair, and a small bookshelf holding a few rare paper books from Earth. Steam rose from the coffee cup in Jackson's hands, its rich aroma a luxury on this desolate planet. But the silence in the room was heavy, pressing against his chest like a stone, broken only by the wind's relentless screams outside. Jackson sat motionless, his scarred hands that had once held rifles and cradled dying comrades, gripping the coffee cup as if it were an anchor keeping him from sinking into the dark. His gray-blue eyes, dulled by years of war, didn't linger on the fire. Instead, they fixed on a small photograph on the table, its edges yellowed and creased from countless touches. Lila, his daughter, beamed in the picture, her sunlit blonde hair shimmering, her eyes like stars. Jackson's finger traced the photo's surface slowly, as if afraid his touch might erase her smile. He paused, his hand trembling slightly, then clenched it into a fist, knuckles whitening. His lips pressed into a tight line, holding back a rising tide of grief. But it wasn't just Lila. Beside the photo lay another object, a warped metal identification tag, dusted with red from a distant planet. It belonged to Marcus, his last comrade, who had screamed, "Run, Jackson," before plasma light consumed him in the battle at Orion's belt. Jackson touched the tag, his fingers brushing the faded inscription, and his chest tightened. He saw them. Marcus, Elena, Tarek, faces now only in memory, their laughter buried under the roar of war. He had survived, but each day on Niveria, he wondered why it wasn't him. A sharp screech from the storm snapped him back. Jackson blinked hard, as if to banish the ghosts. He lifted the coffee cup, but froze mid-motion, his gaze drifting to the window. Snow battered the glass, each icy fragment glinting like the shattered pieces of his life. Lila, his comrades, all he couldn't save. For a fleeting moment, he imagined them out there in the blizzard calling his name. He shook his head, setting the coffee down untouched. Instead, he rose and walked slowly to the window, each step heavy, carrying the weight of a galaxy of guilt and loss. Leaning against the frame, Jackson stared into the white void, where the wind screamed like the voices of those he'd left behind. A memory flashed. Lila's laughter as he hoisted her onto his shoulders, mingled with Marcus's final shout. He hunched, as if the cold outside had seeped within. Turning back, his eyes fell to the photo and tag on the table. He didn't touch them, not this time. Instead, he sank into the chair, hands clasped tightly, the firelight illuminating a weathered face etched with the story of war, loss, and a man fleeing to find himself again. Yet in this warm house, amid the blizzard's wails, there was a small stillness. Jackson closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath, the heater's warmth filling his lungs. Niveria was where he'd come to escape, to face the scars that would never heal. A faint knock at the door, nearly smothered by Niveria's blizzard, snapped through the air. Jackson shot to his feet, fists clenched, eyes sharp with suspicion. No one came here. No one survived out there. A second knock, urgent, pounded against the wood like a plea. He strode to the bookshelf, fingers brushing the cold metal of an old plasma pistol, its chill stirring memories of war. A third knock, desperate, came with a trembling female voice. alien in its cadence, each word torn apart by the freezing cold. "Open the door, please." The voice broke, sharp and raw. "I'll give you my body, anything. Just save my son." Jackson froze, his chest tightening. The naked, desperate offer stabbed him like an icy blade. He moved to the door, pistol gripped tightly, eyes narrowing through the frosted glass slit. Outside, in the blinding snow, a woman stood trembling, her deep purple skin glinting under the faint light from the house. Lyra Valera, her figure flawless despite her tattered cloak, black hair matted, purple eyes glistening, not with tears, but from the cold biting her flesh. She clutched a small boy, also purple-skinned, his large eyes wide, lips pale, shivering in thin clothes. The boy, Cale, looked up, his gaze not fearful, but strangely resolute, as if he understood his mother's gamble. "Go away," Jackson growled through the door, voice rough. "I don't help anyone." He turned, gripping the pistol, but the image of the boy, small, trembling, clung to his mind, stirring a memory he'd tried to bury, a face he hadn't saved. "Sir," a small voice cut through the wind, clear and piercing. "I'm so cold. So's my mom." Cale stepped forward, one hand clutching his mother's cloak, the other pressing the glass, leaving a faint print. His large, bright eyes met Jackson's, not begging, just honest. "I don't want her to do that, but she's scared I'll die." Jackson stood rooted, the pistol trembling in his hand. The boy didn't know it, but those eyes, that sincerity, sliced through the ice around his heart. He saw Lyra sink to her knees, pulling Cale closer, her face buried in his shoulder, trembling, whether from cold or pain, he couldn't tell. She said nothing more, but her silence weighed heavier than any plea. He cursed under his breath, then set the pistol on the table. His hand reached for the bolt, metal clanking as he slid it back. The door swung open, icy wind rushing in, snow scattering across the wooden floor. "Get in," he said gruffly, avoiding Lyra's gaze. "Quick, before you both freeze." Lyra stumbled inside, pulling Cale along, her bare purple feet leaving wet snow prints. She shivered, but her eyes, though weary, flickered with gratitude. Cale looked at Jackson, offering a small, fragile smile, warm as the fire behind them. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice soft but resonant in the quiet room. Jackson slammed the door, shutting out the wind. He leaned against the wall, watching his uninvited guests. His guard remained up, but Cale's eyes, that smile, had cracked open a small fissure in the wall he'd built around himself. The hearth hummed, its firelight dancing, spreading warmth through the wooden room, pushing back the blizzard chill. Jackson moved quickly to an old wooden cabinet, pulling out two thick wool blankets, silver gray, still carrying the faint scent of the wood from his early days on Iveria. He knelt before Lyra and Cale, both still shivering on the floor, their purple skin shimmering under the dim light. Lyra clutched Cale tightly, her eyes wet, lips pale, her torn cloak crusted with snow. Cale, nestled in her arms, looked up at Jackson, his trembling gone, only curiosity in his wide eyes. Jackson handed the blankets to Lyra, his gaze averted, voice curt. "Wrap up, both of you." He grabbed a cloth from the bookshelf, dipped it in warm water from the kettle by the hearth, and passed it to her. She hesitated, hands shaking as she took it, wiping snow from Cale's face. Jackson turned, dragging two wooden chairs closer to the fire. "Sit here. Warm up." Without waiting for a response, he moved to the small kitchen corner, where a few dry food canisters sat on a shelf. The clatter of pots rang out as he started cooking, the smell of dried bean soup and herbs filling the air, simple but warm. Lyra pulled Cale onto a chair, wrapping the blanket tightly around him, her eyes darting to Jackson, wary but tinged with gratitude. Cale leaned into her, whispering, "Mom, it's warm now." She gave a faint smile, brushing his hair, but her eyes remained heavy, carrying a galaxy of pain. Jackson set 3 bowls of soup on the table, sliding 2 toward them. "Eat," he said, voice low, then sat farther off, holding his own bowl, but not eating, his gaze lost in the fire. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the hearth's soft crackle. Kale ate slowly, his eyes sparkling, occasionally glancing at Jackson as if wanting to speak. Lyra ate sparingly, her hands trembling, her gaze sweeping the room, as if weighing something heavy. When Kale yawned, eyes drooping, Jackson stood, pointing to a corner. There's a small room there. Clean bed. Rest. He led them to a tiny room, just big enough for a single bed and an old mattress on the floor. He added another blanket, checked the auxiliary heater in the corner, then turned away without a word. Kale slipped under the covers, curling into his mother, his steady breathing filling the space within minutes. Lyra stood, watching her son, her shoulders trembling as if holding back a tide. She left the room, stepping lightly to Jackson's bedroom doorway, where he sat on the edge of his bed, hands clasped, staring into the dark. Lyra paused at the threshold, slowly untying her tattered cloak, revealing smooth purple skin, her perfect curves glinting in the dim light. She didn't meet his eyes, her voice trembling but resolute. "I said anything you want. I keep my word." Jackson looked up, his gaze hardening, not with desire, but resolve. He stood, swiftly pulling a blanket from his bed and wrapping it tightly around her, covering her body. She flinched, her purple eyes wide with confusion. He met her gaze, his voice low but gentle, each word deliberate. "There was a little girl who needed me once, and I couldn't give her a home. Now I'm giving you and your son a place to stay. Not for any price, but because I don't want anyone to pay to survive." Lyra blinked, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from cold but from a deeper pain. She clutched the blanket, shoulders shaking, her voice a whisper, soft as the wind outside. Others, they demanded more. They wanted everything, just to open a door, to let us survive. She bowed her head, black hair falling to hide her face, but the anguish in her voice cut like a thin blade through the air. I thought you were the same." Jackson shook his head, his eyes softening, though still shadowed by unspoken sorrow. "I'm not them." He turned, gesturing to the small room. "Go sleep. Your son needs you." Lyra stood, blanket wrapped tightly, her eyes following Jackson's retreating figure. She said nothing more, but in that moment, amid the firelight and the cold beyond, a faint spark flickered, a fragile hope that Niveria, and this man, might be a place where she and Kale could begin again. The gray-silver light of Niveria's dawn filtered through the window, dim and choked by the blizzard outside. The hearth crackled, its warmth spreading through the wooden room, mingling with the rich aroma of meat soup. Jackson Thorne stood by the stove, stirring the pot, chunks of meat from a white-furred creature he'd hunted at dawn simmering with dried roots. His snow-dusted coat hung over a chair, his scarred hands moving deliberately, as if cooking were a ritual to keep invisible wounds in check. He set 3 steaming bowls of soup on the wooden table, the rising steam an invitation, then glanced at the window, where snow fell like sharp blades. Lyra and Kale emerged from the small room. She in the clean cloak Jackson had given her the night before, her deep purple skin less pale after sleep, but her violet eyes heavy with a sorrow sharp as ice. Kale, small in an oversized shirt, clutched his mother's hand, his star-bright smile lighting the room. "Smells good, sir," he chirped, his clear voice sparkling with curiosity in his wide eyes. Jackson nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching, a rare smile, like light piercing ice. "Sit. Eat to warm up." He pushed the bowls toward them and sat across, spoon in hand, his gaze flickering over them with a hint of warmth but still holding a fragile distance. Lyra pulled Kale to sit, her hand brushing the bowl, but her fingers froze, trembling slightly, as if pulled into a piercing memory. She stared at the rising steam, her eyes drifting far away, sinking into a shattered world. "On Valera," she began, her voice soft as a breath, each word a thin cut slicing the air. "We used to have meals like this. Taryn, my bondmate, made soup from sweet roots. Kale would bury his face in the bowl, laughing until his cheeks were smeared. She smiled, but the smile melted like snow touching fire, her eyes clouding, silent tears tracing her purple cheeks. Taryn died in a crystal mine explosion. Not an accident. They worked him to death for profit. They took him, then took us too. Jackson looked up, his grip tightening on the spoon, his eyes hardening but not interrupting, as if he knew that pain too well. Lyra bowed her head, black hair falling to hide her face, her voice fading, trembling, as if afraid Kale might hear. Valari culture, bonded pairs, are whole souls. A widow like me, with a child, is a stain. They drove us from the village, called Kale a burden, said I tainted their harmony. To survive, she stopped, her hands clutching the table's edge, her purple knuckles whitening, tears falling onto the table, glinting like melting ice. I traded my body. Men, sometimes women, took everything, my dignity, my hope, pieces of my soul, just for a corner of a street, a scrap of bread. I came to Niveria because here the cold doesn't lie or mock me when I beg. Lyra's tears fell silently, her shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from a pain that cut through every breath. She covered her face, as if to hide from the world, but Kale slid from his chair, small but resolute, wrapping his arms around her shoulders like a living shield. You don't have to do that anymore, he said, his clear voice sharp as steel, a vow beyond his years. I'll get stronger. I'll protect you, so no one makes you cry again. He looked up, his bright purple eyes locking onto Jackson's, not pleading but fierce with resolve. You didn't make my mom cry. I know you're good. I saw you make soup. Let my mom sleep safe. Jackson felt his chest tighten, as if an invisible hand gripped it. Kale's eyes, honest and unwavering, pierced the icy wall he'd built over years. In that moment, he saw another figure, a girl who'd once looked at him with that same trust, calling Dad, with a smile bright as stars. He blinked, turning away, pretending to check the hearth, but really hiding his clouded eyes. Kid, he said, voice hoarse, almost a whisper, you're stronger than I ever was. The words, brief as they were, carried an admission. That Kale, though small, was doing what he couldn't, protecting someone he loved without fear. Lyra wiped her tears, pulling Kale close, her eyes shifting to Jackson, no longer wary but filled with deep gratitude. He's right, she whispered, her voice soft but certain, like the first light after a storm. You're not like them. You gave us a home, asked for nothing. I don't know how to thank you. She stroked Kale's hair, a small smile blooming, carrying a spark of hope for the first time, like a flower on ice. Jackson watched them, then slowly lifted his spoon, taking a bite of soup, its warmth soothing a piece of the scars within. Kale grinned, pushing his own bowl toward Jackson, a small but meaningful gesture. Eat more, sir. I'm full. Jackson hesitated, then took the bowl, his eyes softening, as if a fragment of the ice in his heart had melted. Lyra held her bowl, eating slowly, her gaze moving from Kale to Jackson, a fragile peace settling in. They sat together, eating, the clink of spoons against bowls blending with a hearth's soft crackle. Kale chattered about a star he'd seen last night, his voice lively, making Lyra laugh softly, and Jackson, for the first time, smiled fully, no longer keeping his distance. Amid Niveria's brutal cold, the small room glowed with the warmth of three people, not bound by blood but by shared scars and a budding compassion. Niveria's dawn flared with a pale purple light, filtering through the thinning snow, making the icy hills shimmer like shattered crystals. Jackson Thorne stood at the door, checking the straps of his hunting gear, dagger and plasma pistol secured at his hip. The wind whistled softly, carrying a skin-biting cold, but he inhaled deeply, his breath misting, a sense of clarity spreading through his chest. Kale stood beside him, small in a patched-together hunting suit, his purple eyes blazing, clutching a small knife Jackson had given him. I want to hunt with you, the boy said, his voice firm despite lips trembling in the cold. I want to be stronger to protect Mom. Jackson looked down, his gray-blue eyes softening, as if seeing a piece of himself in the boy. All right, he said, voice low, but listen carefully. Niveria doesn't forgive mistakes. He knelt, pointing to faint tracks in the snow, white fur blending with ice. White-furred prey. See the tracks, front paws off? It's injured, easier to follow. Kale nodded, eyes focused, gripping the knife tightly, following Jackson across the snowy field, each step cautious, as if trained. Inside, Lyra stood by the sink, washing Kale's cloak, her hands gliding over the fabric, her deep purple skin glinting under the dim light. She hummed a Volari melody, low and mournful, but the room was warm with the crackling hearth and the scent of herbs from the soup she was preparing. She hung the cloak on a line, glancing out the window where Jackson and Kale's figures faded into the snow. A small smile curved her lips, no longer heavy, as if this rhythm, washing, cooking, waiting, was stitching together the tears in her heart. Jackson led Kale through a narrow ravine, wind howling through jagged ice rocks. He stopped, pointing to a small cave where warmth from the earth rose, melting snow into puddles. If you're lost, find places like this. Warmth keeps you alive. Kale nodded, then suddenly pointed to a dry bush where a white-furred creature gnawed roots. Jackson smiled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. Good eye. Now quiet, step lightly. He guided Kale's grip on the knife, showing him how to strike swiftly yet precisely. And when the creature fell, Kale didn't cheer but looked at Jackson, eyes shining. I did it, sir. On the way back, Kale paused, picking up a glimmering ice shard shaped like a small star. He carefully carved it with his knife, crafting a rough pendant. For Mom, he said, voice bubbling. And you too. Jackson touched the shard, its coolness stirring a distant memory. But this time, he didn't turn away. You did good, he said, voice rough. And for the first time, he ruffled Kale's hair like a father. They returned, carrying the hunted creature, the smell of blood mingling with the cold. Lyra opened the door, her eyes lighting up at Kale, then softening as they met Jackson's. You're back, she said, her voice light as a melody. She set 3 bowls of herb soup on the table, steam rising, and the 3 sat, the clink of spoons against bowls blending with a heart's crackle. Kale pulled out the ice shard, handing it to Lyra. I made this for you. And for him. Lyra touched it, tears glinting, not from sorrow but from a small joy. Thank you, my love, she whispered, then looked at Jackson, her eyes conveying a wordless gratitude. Jackson held the shard, fingers tracing its surface, and he smiled, a true smile, no longer forced. Kid, this is prettier than anything I've ever seen. He stood, hanging the shard on a cord near the hearth, where it sparkled in the firelight, a symbol of them. 3 people, not bound by blood, but by moments like this. In the days that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Jackson and Kale hunted. He taught the boy to read the wind, to tie knots for warmth, each instruction carrying a father's patience. Lyra tended the house, washing clothes, cooking simple but warm meals, and sometimes the 3 walked the snowy fields together, Kale running ahead, cheering when he found an odd ice crystal, Jackson and Lyra trailing slowly, their eyes meeting with a new understanding. Jackson didn't notice how he smiled more, how his voice softened when he spoke of Niveria's shimmering hills or the underground stream he'd found. He didn't realize Lyra and Kale had become his salvation, filling the wooden house with laughter and warmth, turning Niveria from a frozen wasteland into a home. One evening, as Kale slept, Jackson sat by the hearth, Lyra beside him, folding a freshly washed cloak. He looked at her, her purple eyes glowing in the firelight, and without thinking, he stood, gently pulling her into his arms, pressing a soft but certain kiss to her forehead. You and Kale, he whispered, are the best thing that's ever come to me. Lyra looked up, her eyes tender, her hand brushing his cheek, and she smiled, a smile carrying both hope and healing. Spring arrives on Niveria, soft as a whisper, melting thin ice sheets on the hills, revealing black soil shimmering with minerals. Underground streams gurgle beneath the snow, carrying warmth from the planet's core, and faint purple sunlight pierces the clouds, making the icy plain sparkle like a shattered galaxy. Jackson Thorne kneels beside a small patch of earth near the house, his scarred hands wielding a shovel, digging shallow holes with care. Beside him, Kale, tiny in a patched coat, clutches a pouch of flower seeds, his purple eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Are we really making a garden, Dad?" he asks, his voice clear and bright, his smile warming the lingering chill. Jackson nods, his gray-green eyes softening, like sunlight reflecting off ice. "Purple and golden flowers, like your mom loves. Niveria is harsh, but this soil can nurture life." He points to a hole, handing Kale a tiny, crystalline seed. "Place it gently. Cover it with soil, but don't press hard. Seeds need room to breathe." Kale nods, his hands trembling with excitement, placing the seed in the hole and covering it with small, careful fingers, as if tending to a precious secret. Lyra stands at the doorway, cradling a woolen blanket, her violet skin shimmering in the spring light. She watches Jackson and Kale, her purple eyes gentle, free of the sharp pain they once held. She's just finished washing Kale's coat, simmering a pot of herb soup, and tidying the wooden room, turning it into a true home. She steps outside, carrying a watering can, and kneels beside Kale, helping him sprinkle water over the planted holes. "You're doing wonderfully," she murmurs, stroking his hair, her smile blooming like a flower on frost. Jackson shows Kale how to stack stones around the garden, forming a barrier against the sharp spring winds. Stones hold the soil, keep the water. Everything needs a boundary to grow safely. Kale nods, dragging small rocks, tongue peeking out, focused like a grown-up. Jackson smiles, ruffling his hair, a gesture now as natural as breathing. "You're quick to learn. You'll be a fine gardener." But as the spring sun climbs, bathing the garden in a glow like a living painting, Kale freezes, still clutching a stone, his purple eyes dimming. He lowers his head, his voice small and trembling, as if afraid his words might shatter everything. "Dad, can Mom and I stay with you longer?" He looks up, eyes glistening with tears, summoning memories of freezing nights, gripping his mother's hand, staring at her hollow gaze as she begged at locked doors. "I don't want to go back. I don't want Mom to cry again." Jackson's chest tightens, as if gripped by an invisible hand. He kneels, meeting Kale's eyes, his hand resting firmly on the boy's shoulder, steady as Niveria's stone. He looks into those shimmering purple eyes, his voice low but unwavering, each word a vow. "Kale, this house is yours and your Mom's. No one will ever make you leave. I promise we'll tend this garden, watch these flowers bloom every spring together." He pulls Kale close, hugging him tightly, the boy's smallness stirring memories of a girl he once lost. But this time, he won't let go. Kale hugs back, tears soaking Jackson's coat, but his smile shines, bright as spring's dawn. "I trust you, Dad," he whispers, his voice clear, carrying a vast hope that banishes the shadows of those desperate nights. Lyra, nearby, presses a hand to her chest, her eyes sparkling, not with sorrow, but with a profound joy. She kneels, wrapping her arms around Kale and Jackson, the three melding together amidst the newly sown garden, like seeds finding fertile ground. They resume their work, Kale cheering when he spots a tiny green sprout piercing the soil, Jackson laughing, his voice echoing across the plains, and Lyra humming a Volari melody, soft as a stream's flow. They water the plants, stack stones, and as the spring sun sets, the small garden stands radiant under the purple light, a promise of life amidst Niveria's cold. Jackson looks at Lyra, her eyes like the garden's purple blooms, and smiles, knowing they've healed each other, not just with soil and seeds, but with moments like these.